Hey guys, welcome back. So today I have my September wrap up for you. Sorry this is a little late. Unfortunately, this is the second time I'm having to film this video. There's some growing pains with the new camera I'm using where it only films in like 10-minute increments, and I didn't realize that the first time I did this, so we're gonna try this again. So this month I read 6.5 books. There's one that I didn't finish, unfortunately, and I'll talk about why, but yeah. I'm fairly happy with how my reading month turned out though, because I did read a lot of books with fairly heavy content, so I think I did pretty well. Let's get into the books that I read this month. So first I'm going to talk about the books that I read for my September for Syria, and if you don't know about what I was doing, I will link a video here if you want to check that out, but this month I was reading primarily books by Middle Eastern authors in order to raise awareness about things going on in Syria. So the first book I read, I had to turn back into the library, so I don't have it with me, so I'll put a picture right here, but that is Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi. Persepolis was also a buddy read with Jazzy from Jazzy and Miller, and I will link her channel in the video description down below. Go check her out. She is fantastic. I had a really great time buddy reading this with her and discussing it, and both of us really enjoyed it. Persepolis is an autobiographical graphic novel that is a coming-of-age story of the author growing up in Iran during the revolution, and I loved it. This was definitely a 5-star read for me. I thought it was so well done, the art was beautiful, and I think the fact that it's done in a graphic novel format makes it really accessible. With this kind of historical content a little bit more dry, it's really accessible, it's easy to understand, and you learn a lot in the process. Plus, you're following the story of this young girl as she's growing up and dealing with her sense of identity and where to call home and how she understands herself. And the other thing that's really interesting about this is it talks about the sort of bipolar issues that people have with these dual identities living under the revolution, where behavior was so tightly controlled in public, particularly for women, but for men as well, that most people, including the author, had sort of dual identities. So in public, they would appear as these very conservative sort of women, but in private, they were the exact opposite. And so you kind of see her struggling as she's growing up with those dual identities and not being sure how to handle that, where anyway, there were just a lot of super interesting things in there. Highly recommended. If you haven't picked it up, definitely go do it. The next book I read was a reread, and that was Absent by Betul Haidari, and this is the story of a young woman who lives in Iraq in the 1990s. She lives in Iraq with her aunt and uncle. They are dealing with economic crises, they are dealing with occasional bombings, they're dealing with corrupt government, they're dealing with a lot of things, and this follows her, her aunt and her uncle, and some of the other people who live in their building, and it does a really good job of painting a picture of the time. It's got some coming-of-age elements to it, but it also just really gives you a window into the culture and the changing generations and the conflicts that were going on at the time. I think it's really well done, really beautifully written, and I would certainly recommend it. This, I think, was a 4.5 star read for me. I will also say I'm kind of glad I reread it because I think I got more out of it this time around than I did the first time, which was, man, like a decade ago in college, something like that. Yeah. Speaking of a decade ago, the next book I read has actually been on my bookshelf for over 10 years, which is shameful, I know, but that is Children of the Alley by Naguib Mahfouz, and I finally read this book, and I'm kicking myself for why did I not read it earlier. It was so good. For some reason I thought it would be kind of boring. It's definitely a tome, and I loved it. So this particularly, I think you would particularly enjoy this if you have a background in or an interest in religion or theology, because it's super fascinating what he does here. So the story follows this man, Gabalawi, who is a wealthy man who lives in a mansion at the end of an alley, and then living in the alley are all of his descendants, different generations. And so in this book, we follow different generations of his descendants. Now the story is a sort of allegory, and Gabalawi is a stand-in for God. We also follow main characters who are allegorical representations of Adam, Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad, and it is fascinating. It's dealing with each generation and the issues that they have, and it puts events in really interesting stories. I would highly recommend this if you have any interest in that kind of stuff. I found it fascinating. I thought it was really beautifully written. It definitely does have some violence in it, and I guess there should be a warning in there too for sometimes poor treatment of women, but I will say that was culturally appropriate to the time period that he is dealing with. In case you don't know, Naguib Mahfouz was a very famous Egyptian author. He won the Nobel Literary Prize in the 1980s, and he writes amazing books that were quite controversial, and this book in particular was quite controversial, and I can see why, if for certain communities of faith, but I would recommend picking this up if this sounds at all interesting to you. It's a surprisingly quick read and really thought-provoking. The next book I read this month was another buddy read, and that was The Glass Arrow by Kristen Simmons, and I buddy read this with Lauren from Offbeat Book Digest. I will also link her channel in the video description down below if you want to go check her out. You totally should. She's amazing and hilarious, so I really enjoy her videos. I think she's just like really funny. We both had really mixed feelings about this book, which I almost want to give this a dedicated video because it was good, it was enjoyable to read, but it was sort of a weird thing because it had so much potential where I felt like it could have been a 5-star read for me. But unfortunately, I ended up giving it a 3 stars, and it was just places where the writing fell short in really specific ways. And so, yeah, I think I'm going to do a dedicated video, so keep an eye out for that because the book was really interesting, and if you are a writer, you might be really interested in the review of this book because it's really writing-related issues that I had. So yeah, this was a 3-star read for me. This is a dystopian YA set in a world where women are considered to be property and are literally bought and sold when they come of age. So yeah, very interesting. A lot of really good stuff in here, but like some just really disappointing places where I feel like it could have been better. The last 2 books that I finished this month were not on my TBR. The first one was Illuminae, and I will put a picture here because that was also a library read. I had mixed feelings about this. I went in with really high expectations because so many people on BookTube rave about this book, but I felt like it was just okay. It was creative and I liked the concept behind it, but there were just things I didn't like that much about it. I didn't really care about the main character. She was kind of boring to me. Okay, the other kind of things are kind of spoilers, so when I put my hand down you can keep watching again, but spoiler warning here for Illuminae. I kind of hated the fact that the boyfriend ended up still being alive at the end. I wasn't surprised by it, I sort of saw it coming, but I thought it was such a gimmick and hated that. The other thing that really bothered me about it is this AI who's like killing all these people at the end is all of a sudden like their friend. What the hell is that? Are they crazy? Yeah, those things really, really bothered me about this book. Okay, so spoilers over. I ended up giving this book a 3 stars. It was pretty quick. There were things I liked about it, things that were creative, but I didn't love it, and I don't know that I care enough to go on with the next book. The next book I read, I loved, and that was what everybody's been loving, but The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas, and I'll put a picture right here, because again, that was a library book. Oh man, this book is so good. Everybody should read this. If you haven't read it already, seriously go. It's fantastic. The Hate You Give is a contemporary novel that follows our main character Star, who is a 16-year-old girl of color who sees one of her best friends be shot by a police officer and kind of the things that ensue. I thought this book was amazing. It did such a good job of dealing in nuanced ways with racism and race-related issues, and oh man, it was so good. You even see things like Star has this white boyfriend, and after this she starts to feel guilty about it and question herself and wonder like, should I be dating somebody who's white? Am I like betraying people? It like, oh man, it deals with so many things. The other thing that I think is amazing, and this, you know, maybe is the best thing, the only place I've really seen this done of things that I've read, which I thought was incredible, is that she really pushes you on this thing that people do when these shootings happen, where sometimes information will come out about the person who was killed, that they were a drug dealer or that they had been in prison. And people will sort of go, oh, well, see, like, they kind of deserved it, right? Because they were a drug dealer or something. But she really pushes you on that and says, wait a minute. Like, regardless of their past, regardless of other things they were doing, in that moment, if they were innocent, if they didn't do anything, nothing that they've done makes them deserve to be killed, makes them deserve to be shot. And so she does a fantastic job of really pushing some people's instincts on this issue, and it's beautiful. Like, no, people are more than what these things make them out to be. There are underlying circumstances, and regardless, nobody who is innocent, who's not doing anything, ever deserves that. So yeah, such a good book. I could rave about this book, but go out and read it if you haven't already. It's totally a 5-star read for me. And the last book I read this month is the one that I only got through half of, and I will tell you why. That is a nonfiction book, The Crossing: My Journey to the Shattered Heart of Syria. This book is fantastic, but it is really heavy, and it's really hard to get through, honestly. This is by Samar Yazbek. She is a Syrian woman who had to flee the country and then a couple of years ago snuck back in through the Turkish border, and this is her true telling of the things that she experienced there. And it's horrifying. The things that people are going through, living with bombing all the time, children. I mean, oh man, it's hard to read. It's powerful and it's good, and I hope to finish it, but I've had to kind of take breaks and pace myself because it looks like a pretty small book. I thought I would fly through it. That has not been the case. I've had to take several breaks. It's heartbreaking, and it makes me realize, you know, how much help is needed. And I do want to read you guys just a small portion of this. If trigger warning here, if you are bothered by violence that's happened against children, you may not want to listen to this, but I think it's powerful. I think it's important to hear the things that are really going on there, and this is just a tiny little glimpse into the things that are in this book. Before crossing the border, I had visited a hospital in the Turkish town of Reynali, where there was a special emergency floor dedicated to Syrians wounded by shelling. One room after another reeked of putrefying patients laid out on white sheets with mutilated feet, amputated limbs, hazy eyes. I was accompanied by Maysara and his brother-in-law Manhal, who was one of the first activists to embrace the revolution in Sarakeb. Manhal warned me to brace myself as we entered the room of 2 young girls, 4-year-old Diana and 11-year-old Shaima. Diana had been hit in the spinal cord by a bullet, causing permanent paralysis. She lay there frozen, like a panic-stricken rabbit. It seemed a miracle that her small, fragile body hadn't been completely blown apart under the impact. The little girl had been crossing the street to buy pastry for breakfast when it had happened. What on earth was the sniper thinking when he aimed his sights on her back? In the hospital bed next to Diana was Shaima, whose leg had been blown off by a shell and whose left hand had been shattered by shrapnel. Her other foot was also injured, and wounds covered her body. She and her family had been taken by surprise as they sat in front of their house. 9 members of her family were killed, including her mother. Her aunt stood by her bedside. As Shaima looked at me, her gaze was an unsettling mixture of pleading and anger. A white bandage was wrapped around her pelvis, stopping at her upper thigh. There was an empty space where her legs should have been. We are made whole by our imperfections, I thought to myself, and we are incomplete when we are whole, but there was nothing I could say to this child. My fingers touched her forehead. She smiled. Goes on, and there, you know, that's just like a tiny glimpse into the things that are in here. And yeah, if you guys haven't looked at it already, I would really recommend that you go watch my video talking about the Preemptive Love Coalition. They're doing really fantastic work right now in Iraq and Syria, working with refugees, bringing important medical care and food and water to people who need it the most. And I will link that video here. Please go check them out. I'll put their website in the video description down below. Yeah, they're really amazing. Okay, so that is my wrap up for September. Yeah, a lot of pretty intense books. October I think is going to be a little bit more fun, but I also think there were a lot of really important things that came out of this month, and so I'm happy that I read what I read. In the comments down below, let me know what you guys read this month, if you read any of these, or if you have any thoughts on them. I would love to hear. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and do subscribe to see more. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time.